a Transit Research Program Director for Qatar, the Center for Urban Transportation Research, and I also serve as the lead for the Florida Automated Vehicle Summit being held this year in Miami on November 20th through the 22nd. Today I'd like to welcome our own State Senator Jeff Brandes to our Qatar Transportation webcast series. Senator Brandes will highlight current Florida legislation regarding autonomous and shared vehicles, explain the need for third-party validators in this field, and share some of our most exciting projects currently operating in the state, as well as what he believes the future holds for this fascinating industry in the great state of Florida. First, a little background on Senator Brandes. He's a lifelong resident of St. Petersburg, Florida, a veteran, and a local businessman. After serving in the Army from 1999 to 2006, he joined his grandfather in the family lumber business. He was first elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 2010. He was elected to the Florida Senate in 2012, then re-elected in 2014 and 2016. He has chaired the Senate Committee on Transportation, the Appropriations Subcommittee on Transportation, Tourism and Economic Development, and currently he serves as chair of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Criminal and Civil Justice. He is nationally recognized as a policy leader in the areas of autonomous vehicles and mobility, flood insurance, and criminal justice reform. Senator Brandes and his wife Natalie have 4 children: Charlotte, known as Lottie; Elizabeth, known as Lizzie; Colin, and Connor. Today I welcome Senator Brandes. Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis. I really appreciate that, and glad to be with you all. And hopefully we can get through this and kind of talk through some of your questions at the end. Really want to explore a number of points today, specifically why we got into the AV legislation, how that really started. We'll talk a little bit about AVs, micromobility, personal delivery devices, or we know as PDDs. We'll talk a little bit about the autonomous vehicle landscape, and then kind of talk through what the future of AV looks like in Florida, and then touch a little bit on electrification, which I think you're actually going to see probably before we see mainstream AVs. I think the world of electrification is changing pretty quickly. As Dennis said, I was an Army officer, so I joined the Army 7 days after high school and spent 11 years in the military, spent 2003, 2004 in the 101st, and happened to be a transportation officer while I was in, and gave me a great background in transportation, both in shipborne transportation, working at port facilities, but then when I was in Iraq running convoys all over the country, which provided an incredible perspective, and probably helped me realize that it would have been, the world would have been a lot safer for me and my soldiers had we not had to be in those convoys. And so I started working on, I started thinking about that early on. When I was first elected back in 2010, you try to figure out as an elected official how you're going to kind of break out from the pack of other members. And so I decided I would start thinking about what's the big idea in the area of public policy of transportation. So I started looking through a variety of different sources, but to me the single best source of knowledge for new legislators and the best way to kind of get so much information in a short period of time is simply watching TED Talks. And so I remember driving up to Tallahassee and watching the Sebastian Thrun TED Talks, I'm sure you've all seen, where he first kind of lays out the case for self-driving cars. And obviously he was at Stanford and the Carnegie Mellon team. They participated in the DARPA Grand Challenges, and it was really their journey through the DARPA Grand Challenges that kind of led him and the Google folks at Google towards having a broader discussion about self-driving cars. And so I remember hearing that video and then going back and rewinding it about 10 times as I drove up to Tallahassee, thinking about the implications of this. I turned and talked to my legislative aide who said, hey, look, I said, I really want to work on self-driving cars. And he said, people will think you're crazy. And so I did what any good legislator would do. I got a new legislative aide. And so he wasn't as good as talking me out of legislation, and so began to work back in 2010 and then early in 2011 on self-driving cars. First called up Google because they were the only people working in the industry at that time in the space that I knew of, and after some discussion with them, they agreed to bring the vehicles down to Florida. and had an opportunity for legislators to drive in those vehicles. And Florida really was the second state behind Nevada to implement self-driving car legislation on its books. Since then, we've iterated that legislation an additional 2 times. So we're really in the 3.0 version, and that 3.0 version just passed this year. It was implemented in July of this year, and really focuses in on a number of key areas. One, we redefined what an automated driving system was, specifically that it was this hardware and software capable of performing the entire dynamic driving task of an autonomous vehicle on a sustained basis, and really kind of honing in on the definitions of that. We defined an autonomous vehicle as any vehicle with a means of equipped with an autonomous driving system. This is really focused in on level 3. So autonomous vehicles, we would consider a level 3 vehicle. Anything that's a level 1 or 2, we wouldn't consider an autonomous vehicle in Florida. So today, a Tesla, for example, is not considered an autonomous vehicle in Florida. It does not fall under Florida's autonomous vehicle law. But if someone were to come out with a level 3 vehicle that was commercially available, or a level 4 plus vehicle, they would fall under the autonomous vehicle for level 3. And then we had a separate category for the fully autonomous vehicle, which means a vehicle equipped with a human automated driver system designed to function without a human operator. And these are really focused in on the shuttles and other types of vehicles that typically would operate with or without a steering wheel as a level 4 or eventually a level 5 vehicle. And we really focused in our conversation on making sure that we provided a level of insurance requirements that's standardized for fully autonomous vehicles, because we think that's one of the best things we can do. As it relates to kind of just a simple level 3, or not really simple, but a level 3 vehicle, it gets obviously much more complex when you have that human interface and the trade-off between the vehicles. So we still left that as an open discussion for what the correct amounts of insurance should be for those types of vehicles. And so they're required to carry just the minimum insurance required under Florida law, but a fully autonomous vehicle is required to carry $1 million of insurance. We think that's at least right now a proxy for some type of third-party validator, and that we'll talk a little bit about later on. Again, this year we also talked a little bit about micromobility devices. It's amazing to think that scooters have really only been around for 24, 36 months as we've known them. Before that, they were a toy, essentially. And so, but this whole new world of micromobility devices is emerging. But this is really the first legislative session that the legislature got to kind of get its arms around how we wanted to deal with micromobility devices. And so we took the tack that because the micromobility devices are so new into the space of mobility, as a major platform shift, that the best thing we could do was to simply authorize them, define what a micromobility device was, and then to allow cities some flexibility. So we basically described a micromobility device as a motorized transportation device. The real focus here is that it could go less than 20 miles per hour on level ground. And we include both motorized scooters and bicycles in that chapter. So e-bikes obviously are an emerging area as well, along with motorized scooters. And for motorized scooters, we thought it was important that we made the distinction that they were considered motorized scooters with or without a seat or a saddle. This is because we see all of these different lines merging between what is a scooter, what is an e-bike, and what is between a scooter and an e-bike. If I put a seat on a scooter, does that make it a bike? Does a bike require to have pedals? We didn't want to have to get into those arguments, so we just said basically everything that operates in that space is considered a motorized scooter, and clearly we'll probably come back this year and break out specific definitions for different types of e-bikes. But I think we're really focused in on allowing cities to decide how to best regulate in their local jurisdictions the idea of micromobility devices, and we think that there'll be some that ban them completely. We think there'll be some that really embrace them, and early on we think that's probably the right way to go. Let people get comfortable with them. Again, this is a brand new mode of transportation, and so it's important that we offer the flexibility to cities for them to get comfortable with those devices, so that we can move forward together. Additionally, we worked on, back in 2017, personal delivery devices. I'm sure you've seen these as the little, essentially, sidewalk drones. They're essentially the size of a college refrigerator, and they operate on sidewalks. Originally, we worked with Starship, which was the designer, the first real designer of these that we had seen publicly, and their focus was on their specific product, which had a weight of less than 80 pounds, so we put that in statute. We're going to be modifying that this year to a higher weight. But there's a variety of different operators coming out. FedEx is operating their version. Amazon has a version that looks very much like the version from Starship. But we're seeing more and more of the discussion about the first and last mile, specifically as it relates to personal delivery devices, and something that the legislature needed to make sure we allowed for and provided additional flexibility for. And so we really think of these as essentially sidewalk drones. While we haven't really delved too far into the aerial delivery devices and aerial drones yet, simply because the FAA is still working out many of the complicated issues regarding airspace with delivery devices and drones of that nature. We really think it's the legislature's role to take on some of these tougher questions as it relates to sidewalks and additional areas of ground-based transportation policy. So we needed legislation, obviously, regarding autonomous vehicles because it was an emerging area. But because now Florida has moved through kind of essentially what was testing in the first version back in 2011 to 2014, where we kind of muddied the water as to whether a driver needed to be physically present in the vehicle in order for it to operate in Florida, and remove some of the insurance requirements, to now in 2019, where we have moved to essentially like an explicit understanding that the driver does not need to be physically present in the vehicle. We also are really focused in, again, this year on teleoperations, because we think that teleoperations are going to be they're going to play a significant role, at least in the near future, for most of these vehicles. They're going to come upon situations that for whatever reason, the software is either incapable or inoperative to handle, and the opportunity for somebody to teleoperate those vehicles, at least in the short term, is probably going to be needed in a vast majority of the self-driving vehicles on the roads today. In fact, some of the vehicles like Starsky Robotics are using them as building them into their platform really as a key piece of their overall network, because it allows them to kind of cheat on the first and last mile. They can put it self-driving on the interstates, and yet they can leave it on human-driven during the drive. So we also obviously have a number of projects going on in Florida today. We've really created an environment that the marketplace can flourish in, and you're starting to see that more and more with the number of different companies that are in Florida testing today. In fact, just yesterday, Google announced that they're doing rain testing in Naples and in Miami. So I think that's a pretty good precursor to them potentially building a broader market here in Florida. But in Florida today, we have Ford and Argo AI, really in partnership with a variety of different companies down in the Miami market, not only exploring autonomy, but also exploring the business model behind autonomy. For example, they've partnered with Postmates, Domino's, and with Walmart. With Postmates, they're looking at package delivery, obviously. With Domino's, the big question is, will people come down from a Miami high-rise to get their pizza, and what type of incentives would you have to operate or offer for people to come downstairs? And how would you do those types of deliveries of those types of products? And then obviously with Walmart, they're focusing in on fresh food, and how they can continue to explore that market. So Ford and Argo are moving well beyond just looking at self-driving. They're looking at business models as well, and I think you're going to see a lot of key findings come out of their discussion in the coming months. We also have another company called Voyage that's operating in the Villages. Interesting that the Villages actually took an equity stake in Voyage and provided them some exclusivity to operate in the Villages. If you aren't familiar with the Villages, it's pretty much the world's largest retirement community. And what you find when you drive around the Villages is a lot of golf carts, and it's a major challenge there is that most people get around via golf carts. But mobility for seniors is something that is a growing challenge, especially as we live longer, and the continued push is to keep people in their homes and out of nursing homes. So in order to provide mobility, they've really focused in on retirement communities in a geofenced area. So their vehicles are a level 4 vehicle within the geofenced area, and they operate specifically within the villages today in Florida, but they're going to be growing those to other markets around the country as well. And they've done some incredible work in kind of learning how seniors interact with their vehicles. They probably have some of the most intense information about human-machine interaction, and especially how seniors are interacting with vehicles and what's important for seniors, and close communities like the Villages for those types of vehicles to operate. We talked a little bit about Starsky Robotics earlier, and Starsky is a semi-tractor trailer company that is operating in businesses in Florida today. They're a self-driving tractor trailer on the interstates, and then when they get off the on-ramp, they move into a teleoperation mode. So they have a teleoperation center in Jacksonville, and it operates the vehicles for the first and last mile, and then if they're going into a delivery site to obviously into the delivery site as well. And so they just completed the first known 10 miles of operation without a human driver on public roads. That occurred on the Turnpike a couple of months ago. And so they're continuing to grow out their business, but we're also hearing from a number of other companies that they're interested in operating self-driving trucks in Florida. And really where I think the first self-driving markets will really emerge is in the trucking space, simply because they don't have to deal with some of the harder issues of operating in and around cities. They can stick to the open roads and not deal with some of the other complicated issues of the first and last mile. But again, they're going to have a robust teleoperation center. Another company that's operating here in Florida that really is kind of a bright star for our state is a company called Luminar. If you think about the world of LiDAR sensors, there really is a handful of names at the top of the kind of the order of LiDAR sensors, and Velodyne and Luminar are right up there at the top. And this is a sensor company which is still based in San Francisco, but has a huge area of operation in the Central Florida market, specifically as part of UCF. And just operates just outside of UCF, but has really enjoyed working with the talented workforce that we have here in the UCF market, specifically as it relates to optics. And so they've been growing their business with OEMs and other companies in the LiDAR space, but really are excited to see them participate in Florida. I think they will become a major player in the overall conversation about self-driving in Florida in the future. So we go back briefly and talk a little bit about why we chose to use insurance as a proxy for a third-party validator. But really, it's the important piece here is that we begin to talk about there's going to have to be someone who comes and validates that the software and hardware systems working together are safe enough to operate on the roads. And it seems incompatible that would be the states early on, simply because we can put a human driver through a driving test, and we will, in about 30 minutes, we'll be able to say yes or no, they're able to drive. And we expect them to be able to deal with the millions of different scenarios that we would encounter. The simple truth is, with self-driving vehicles, you can't give them that same test because they'll just master the test that you gave them. You have to be able to put them alternately through millions and millions of scenarios as well, and that's where the third-party validators are going to come in. You need somebody who's able to see a variety of these different vehicles, set up the scenarios virtually and in real time with the actual vehicles, but is able to run a variety of different scenarios and modify the scenarios, fuzzy the scenarios, if you will, in order for the vehicles to operate. And I think that's what's important. And what we're just beginning to see emerge is a number of companies that are going to begin to operate as validators. I think you're going to initially see them in the insurance market. In fact, one of the first products rolled out was a company called A-Verify by Munich Re, which has been a major player in the space of self-driving vehicles on the insurance front. Obviously, they have to have if they're insuring these vehicles, they've got their skin in the game, and so it's up to them to really be the third-party validators. I think you're going to see a number of other companies come out, but we're really lacking in the industry overall, and even the federal government isn't playing this role, is essentially the good housekeeping seal of approval that the vehicle is safe enough to operate on the roads. I mean, if you think about it, even a 999 safety rating is something that we struggle with, because it could drive 1,000 miles, and if it only gets in an accident once every 1,000 miles, that's still way too many. So we have to continue to increase and improve the safety of these vehicles. There's been some conversation that we shouldn't compete on safety because we should just make sure they're safe. And I think, at least with the latest Boeing tragedies and recognition, I think I want companies to compete on safety. I desperately want AV companies to compete on safety and continue to make sure that their vehicles are safe to operate on our roads. If we're going to give you access to the streets of Florida, and we're going to require that you carry insurance, we want to make sure that your vehicles are safe. And so in the short term, I think that means that they carry an appropriate amount of insurance for a level 4 plus vehicle. But in the long term, I think you'll have to require a level of insurance, and there'll be a requirement that you have some third-party validation. If you think about it, you and I get a driver's license and insurance. A third-party validator is essentially a driver's license and insurance. So it's very easy to explain to legislators that you need to get a driver's license and insurance, just like you for a self-driving vehicle, just like you do for a human-driven vehicle. It translates very, very well, and we can contextualize that. Let's move on quickly to electrification, because I think this is where you're going to see the biggest change in Florida over the next 3 to 5 years. If you go back to 2010, there was 21 different vehicles that were for sale that were electric. If you go to 2014, that number had grown to 46. In 2018, that number had grown to 292 different electric vehicles. And it's projected by 2020, you're going to see 418 different models of electric vehicles available for sale, which creates its own set of interesting challenges for a state like Florida. One, we have to deal with the issue of the gas tax. Two, we have an interesting occurrence of hurricanes that occurs, once, twice, 0 times a year, but randomly, and occasionally we have to evacuate 1 million people. Of course, it's not a huge challenge when less than 0.5% of vehicles on the roads in Florida today are electric. But with the growing trend, and obviously with the growing availability of electric variants of different models, we see that growing trend to become a significant challenge over the next 5 years, as you get 2 to 5% of vehicles on the roads that could potentially be electric. And that number will continue to grow until I believe it'll be a majority of vehicles on Florida's roads that will be electric in the next couple of decades. And so we need to be thinking about this, planning for this today, and recognizing that you're going to see electrification at scale long before I think you see autonomy at scale. And if you think about it, electrification is really the first rogue wave to hit the auto industry that we've seen, and it will quickly be followed by the hit of autonomy. And so you're going to see it transform the auto dealer network, the auto manufacturer network, but also how states react to electrification as well, because we're going to have to deal with the gas tax. That takes us to our next slide, which really looks at how states are dealing with this question of the gas tax, and something that Florida's going to have to deal with probably sooner rather than later as it relates to electric vehicles. Many states are introducing an EV fee at the time of registration. I think in the short term this probably makes the most sense. You have some states like Oregon and others that are exploring a VMT for vehicles, and my belief is it's probably really too early for that discussion, largely because the cost of collection is so high. If you think about it today, the gas tax virtually costs the state nothing to collect because we're largely collecting from the distributors and they're collecting it from the individual gas stations. But if I'm collecting from 10 million vehicles, individual vehicle miles traveled, and having to process those payments and everything else, that becomes a significant cost to the state. And so I think in the short term, the best way to handle this would be some type of registration fee. And you can see the states that have implemented a registration fee. They range from a maximum in Michigan of $235 to a minimum fee of $30 in Oklahoma. And then you can see the average. We actually asked OPAGA to look at this and give us a range of what the numbers really would be for Florida. And they came out with the average for a Florida vehicle would be right around $190. And so I think what you're going to see us do in the coming year as part of an electrification bill is put together a process by which the Department of Revenue would calculate the average internal combustion engine gas tax every year and apply that to electric vehicle registrations going forward. We would imagine that will start taking place in 2021, and probably in January 2021 we'll begin to implement an EV fee at registration for vehicles, simply because we've got to continue to maintain roads and infrastructure, and it'll be a lot easier to do when EVs are 0.5% of vehicles than later on when they're a growing percentage. And so we think it's important that we get our arms around electrification. We think it's specifically from the tax perspective, from the planning perspective for hurricanes and evacuations, and then ask the tough questions of Congress to potentially allow us to begin to use rest stops in other facilities that are federally prohibited from using electric vehicle charging stations. But we're going to have a policy of how do we get cities and counties to engage at a more meaningful level in the conversation about electric vehicle charging stations and at least the planning side of that business. So we're going to continue to work on that area. So I think over the next 30 years, the trend is radically more electric. You can see a world where a vast majority of the vehicles on the roads will be electric. I think if those vehicles are
it seems like we've lost the senator. Hopefully he can quickly.
And I think that transitions well into our conversation on infrastructure. I think the major shift in the major area of policy that we're going to have to tackle next in the state is the discussion about the overall infrastructure for the state as we think about cities transforming and how both electric and autonomous vehicles are going to reshape our downtowns. We can imagine a world where parking is no longer needed at the level that we need to park at today. We can imagine that if we're building a Class A or Class B office building, that building's largely going to have a 75 to 100-year lifespan. And so a vast majority of the time, even if we think that autonomous vehicles are 10 or 15 years out, a vast majority of that time is going to be with those vehicles being somewhat self-driving or fully self-driving. And so we may not need those parking structures. And so how do we begin to have the conversation with cities and designers about making sure that those facilities are convertible for the later years of their lifespan? I think that's something that you're beginning to see top firms talk about and beginning to consider. Last year we had a presentation from Gensler that was talking about how they're rethinking parking And I think you're going to see more and more discussions around that. You're also seeing communities pop up that are specifically focused on the future of self-driving and delivery drones. So if you go down to South Florida, we have Babcock Ranch, where TransDev is operating today, that is really focused in on making sure that their infrastructure is designed around self-driving with a community center feel, but a self-driving shuttle that will pick you up eventually at your doorstep and take you to the downtown core, but then also contemplating delivery drones as delivering your package so that the Amazon driver would drop off at a central location, and then for that last mile of transportation, you would have a delivery drone. But I think as far as autonomy goes, and then the conversation of electrification and how communities can begin to have a broader conversation around electrification. The big shift in electrification is we're moving from a fuel depot model where you and I take our vehicles and fill them up at a fuel depot, a gas station, if you will, to essentially a top-up model. And in a top-up model, you're kind of always, you're never really empty, but you're always kind of topping up. And that's what electric vehicle ownership is really like. And so how do we begin to think more of a top-up areas? So that's going to be more level 2 chargers strategically placed, but specifically at businesses, well-used government facilities in the short term, and then areas like apartment complexes, so that we can deal with this question of equity and making sure that people who are living in apartment complexes also have access to utilize electric vehicles if they choose to do that. And so more and more we're kind of talking about what needs to be done and how do we kind of kickstart this discussion. What incentives are required for apartment complexes? What incentives are required for businesses if they are? But then also how can we help cities plan? And so what I hope you'll see us using our dollars that we're going to generate from a fee on electric vehicles for the first few years is to really focus in on some of these questions, begin to kind of cast this vision for what we see electrification being in the future. I think those are the areas that I'm really focused in on. I think the area of infrastructure is one that we've got to consistently talk about, and one of the areas that I'm really interested in and hope that Florida will continue to lead on. But we're already seeing the private sector begin to lead on some of these questions of infrastructure. But I'm sure we'll generate many, many more as the technology continues to develop out. So with that, Dennis, I can't see the questions, but if you want to read off the questions as they come in, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has, or however you want to handle questions. I'm up for it.
All right. Well, thank you again, Senator, for your presentation, and truly thank you for all your efforts in the state of Florida and nationwide in the field of automated, electric, shared, and connected. We really do appreciate that. One question that I have is, where have you found major opposition? Who's opposing automation or electrification, shared mobility?
So I think you're going to see kind of early opposition coming from certain groups, and then obviously I think you're going to see a shift in the opposition as we move forward. So I think early opposition largely came from the trial bar. And so their concerns about making sure there was appropriate insurance amounts, understand that this is going to be massively disruptive to that industry over time, simply because if these vehicles aren't running into each other, who do you sue? So I think you could see it be pretty disruptive to the trial bar, which also means it'll be disruptive to hospital emergency rooms. As there's less and less accidents, there will be more and more. There will be less severity of the accidents, and then less opportunities for people to go to the emergency room. So I think you could see the front end of medicine shifting as well. Obviously, I think lower lawsuits and less injuries are both very, very positive, but I think you're going to see that have a pretty profound shift over time on both of those industries. But if we move into kind of whose ox gets gored later on, I think the major auto manufacturers will be, I think you could see us move to half or major consolidation in the auto manufacturing space, where you could see half of your auto manufacturers merging or or disappearing over the next 2 decades as electrification hits and then autonomy hits. You're already seeing this discussion between Ford and VW Group. You're starting to see more and more discussions between other OEMs and other auto manufacturers as they're looking for consolidation and efficiency because they're seeing this coming too. And that's so I think you could see some there. Specifically as it relates to trucking, I think your big push is going to be from the unions. Although there's over 50,000 truck driving jobs available in this country today or open in this country today, I think you're going to see over time more and more trucking naturally, at least long-haul trucking, the team trucking that you can really make money at, that position going away. And I think you're going to see folks lobbying both at the state level and, frankly, in the congressional level for against autonomous trucking. And so I think there's going to have to be some pushback in that world. So I think those are the early and kind of the late sector transitions and people who are going to have some challenges with trucking.
All right, well, thank you. How has your mindset changed over the last few years regarding the projected speed and development of automation? I mean, I know just 5 years ago, today we were supposed to have full autonomy in the country,
right.
And here we are. So how's it changed?
Yeah, I think, there's in 2017, in 2018, there was so much hype around this. It was almost like you were one line of code away from full autonomy. I think we've kind of sobered up from that hype, and some people call it the trough of disillusionment now. But I think we're working ourselves through this thing that, look, we maybe have 95% or 90% of autonomy handled, but the 5 or 10% that we still have to handle is going to take just as long to work out as the first 90%. As with most things, that tends to be the case. And so I think you're probably going to see, and that's why I believe electrification will come online now before autonomy, maybe other than trucking. And so I think you're going to see, if you see autonomy, it will be largely geofenced. I think the villages, major ports could become autonomous over the next few years. Those types of port operations, maybe short hauls from the ports, will become fully autonomous in the next 5 to 7 years. But the big trend that you're going to see in Florida is not going to be autonomy in the next 3 to 5 years. It's going to be electrification. And as more and more electric vehicles come online, we're going to have to deal with this question of the gas tax. We're going to have to deal with collection of infrastructure. We're going to have to think about, ultimately about two-way power, because these vehicles can be used to store power on the grid. And so all of the kind of thinking on electrical systems is going to have to change, as well as evacuations, as well as kind of the overall questions that come with electrification. So I think that's the major shift you're going to see over the next 5 to 7 years is the electrification space.
Okay, thank you. What are your thoughts on vehicle miles traveled? We've heard a lot about people talking about how it'll be reduced, and then some major players talking about how it's going to significantly increase.
Yeah, I think the question's still out there. I really do. I think ultimately the tax policy will be designed to inhibit what we call zombie vehicles. And I think for the most part you'll see us, the whole shift of the shared economy is this drive towards efficiency. And I think with everybody having Nest cameras in their homes and doorbell cameras and everything else like that, I actually think largely packages will be shifted to delivering at night or early morning. I think you're going to see that become a kind of a potentially a major shift. But that should shift some of the traffic off of the roads during the day. But again, I think you're going to have tax policy and cities' policies that will shift the traffic so that we maximize the efficiency of vehicles. I think there will be incentives for people to ride together. I think that will, something we're going to work through. But again, we're exploring all of this stuff, all of this space. I mean, this is just so new. It's hard to see exactly clearly how this is all going to play out. I think if you think about more so like autonomy than electrification, autonomy, I think you can look about 5 years out and see where you are, but beyond that, it's just too foggy. So I think the best thing we can do is slow down and focus on things that maximize our options for the future, because we just don't know what the future holds. We need to be very cautious about making strategic investments in the long-term nature in a world where we can only see 5 years out. I remember meeting with Anant Prasad when he was DOT Secretary, and as we kind of contemplated over dinner one night what the future of autonomy was going to be, it became clear that all our 30-year plans were wrong. Our 10-year plans were probably wrong, and we weren't sure about our 5-year plans yet. So I think that's how we have to think about the future of autonomy, and specifically as it relates to VNT and some of these other questions. I think you're going to see legislators, cities, and frankly tax policy come in to handle some of them.
All right, and finally, share with us a little bit more about the Florida Automated Vehicle Summit coming up in Miami at the beginning of fall this year.
So we're always trying to up our game from the previous year, and last year I always thought how tough it was going to be to really bring our A game to this year. But as we put our plenary speakers together, as the word has grown about how important special FAV has become to the kind of broader policy conversation as a whole, and because we specifically started to branch off into other topics besides simply autonomy, I think what you're going to see coming out of this is really a broader conversation on a variety of the kind of cutting-edge issues that the state's going to have to deal with. Because of our conversation about electrification, we've reached out to the CEO of ChargePoint, which is the nation's largest charging network, and he has agreed to do a keynote address for the AV Summit. We also generally start with a discussion from either a major investment bank or a consulting firm, and this year we've asked Deloitte to come kind of give us their 30,000-foot view of what's going on in the world of mobility. How are cities changing? Where do we need to be making strategic investments? And so you're going to start with a conversation with Deloitte, and then we'll transition to a conversation on electrification. And then because we're down in Miami, and that's where Ford and Argo AI is, we're going to have a major presentation from Ford and Argo AI, really focused in on not just autonomy, but on that business model discussion. So we think that we'll have some ability to have a conversation about how cities and states should be thinking about business models and how that adjustment's going to take place. But I would say this year's theme really is autonomy, it's electrification, and then there's the emerging area of vertical takeoff and landing, in which will be a fascinating discussion. And we've got a commitment from Boeing and Embraer that will both be presenting or in discussion on their vision for vertical takeoff and landing. We're in conversations with Uber as well, because we think they'll be a major player on the platform of vertical takeoff and landing. Interestingly, we think that many of these vertical takeoff and landing vehicles will be electric. And so ChargePoint is actually working on a conversation with them of how to charge at scale quickly vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, especially when you're thinking about them being on the landing platform and only having a few minutes. I was talking to the CEO of the company the other day, and he says, we use like half the amount of electricity, or trying to get half the amount of electricity into those vehicles that the Empire State Building uses in a short period of time. And so they're having to really try to figure out how to get the energy on, the heat off of that vertical takeoff and landing device. So I think you're going to see some of that discussion emerge, just to kind of expand people's minds as to where transportation and mobility are going. Probably have some conversation on infrastructure, and then have a trucking panel as well, because I think it's such an important area and probably the first area of autonomy that you'll really see develop out. But I have to believe that this is going to be, I keep telling people this every year, I feel like this is going to be our best summit ever, simply because of the quality and the caliber of speakers that we've been able to attract, and frankly the notoriety that FAV is getting around the country. And so it's exciting to see this take shape again, and hope you all will plan to attend.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator. Great presentation. We really thank you, and we thank the audience. And Stephanie, I guess it's for you to bring it home.
Yes, thank you so much, Dennis, Senator Brandis, for the great presentation today. I did open up the evaluation on your end. If for whatever reason it hasn't opened, simply locate the link that says evaluation 8.20.19. That's today's evaluation. Simply click on the link you wish to visit, and then click Browse To, and that will open up. We do appreciate you hanging in with us today, as we did have a minor technical challenge. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll get it posted as quickly as possible. Our next Cutter webcast is scheduled for next Thursday, August 29th. We are inviting back Ms. Jody Godfrey, who will talk about her observations from the 2017 NHTS data. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next week.